Hey everyone, it's Shay here with the Socialite Podcast. Thanks so much for tuning in to another episode of the Socialite. Today we have a very special guest who is joining us to talk about the importance of empowerment and connectedness and its impact on community. And our special guest is Kirstin Tipps. So Kirstin, thank you so much for being here.
Awesome. I'm glad to be here. And so I'll just introduce myself. My name is Kirstin Tipps. I was born in Texas, but moved around quite a bit as a kid, which kind of transitioned me into military spouse life pretty easily. And so that is what connected Shay and I down here, both stationed in Key West, or our husbands are. And let's see, I have 2 girls and 2 dogs. And I love them all dearly, but of course love my girls more. And I work part-time at the preschool co-op. And then I also have a baking business on the side where I make cakes and cookies.
Nice. Yeah. Yes. So when we're talking about empowerment and connectedness and the impact on community, how does that resonate with you? Like what speaks to you when that comes to mind?
I really just think a lot about the different ways that being connected to other people has been just a lifeline in my life. Like, obviously, we all need that human connection. Moving around a lot makes that hard. So I've had to find that empowerment inside of myself to really kind of put myself out there and find that connection with other people and to build a community around myself with each place I've lived. And so a lot of times, especially as a kid, that was really found through like my community of faith. And then that's continued on into my adult life and being a military spouse. But at the same time, finding that connectedness and community through the military community. And I think that we have to find inside of ourselves that drive to kind of put ourselves out there.
Mm-hmm.
You almost have to like friend date to find connection, And I've definitely been burned a few times by people. And I've probably unintentionally or unknowingly burned some other people in their journey. But I've really worked hard to not let that completely close me off to being connected with other people and to continue to try to find community.
Yeah, definitely. And Key West is such a different animal. Last week I spoke with Marjorie Townsend about this, and it's just so isolated, but she put it, she explained it very well. Like, it's so small and so isolated, but there's so much going on. And um, it's truly a different animal of its breed. And I'm curious to know, like, how has Key West been different for you compared to other places that you've lived?
It's definitely been interesting because the culture is pretty different from what I'm used to. So,
Mm-hmm.
we were out in Guam for his first duty station, and the majority of our friends were other military people. In fact, he had been out there a year before me single, so pretty much all of our friends were other single guys. So that was kind of interesting. I was like, I need girlfriends. Yeah. And then being in Texas and Mississippi, you're kind of right there in the Bible Belt. And
Mm-hmm.
so it's just kind of how I grew up, like the way that I would connect with people and kind of the ideals that people had and the belief systems and the way people lived were very similar to how I grew up. Being down here in Key West, Florida is kind of, I guess, considered more conservative and all of that, but you get to Key West and it's, like you said, a completely different animal. And so it's been interesting to see just the culture differences down here. I've definitely kind of honed in on building community through like our church and some of the other military spouses, and finding that common ground that we have. And then I've joined the Keys Choral Arts Society. And so it's kind of funny because sometimes people like will just kind of drop something and you're like, oh, okay, this is how they believe or whatever. And you're just kind of like, well, I believe completely different.
Yeah.
But I'm just going to kind of like, you kind of learn to avoid those big topics a little bit in the casual conversation as far as like religion and politics. But we kind of have learned to find other things to do down here outside of kind of that drinking and partying scene. That's really not us. And with having young kids, it's just not our scene. But yeah, it's definitely different. And it's taught me that sometimes you just have to like search a little harder to find your community.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's one thing that I had struggled with the first year that we were here. Like I was very pregnant. So, most
Yes.
people, when they think about Key West, they think about drinking, boating, sunshine year round, the green
Yes.
flash when the sunset, hits the horizon, and Duval Street. And that just wasn't anything that I could be part of or really kind of wanted to. So
Yeah.
you had mentioned finding those commonalities and having to dig deep.
Mhm.
And it's like, there's so much cram packed on the island, and, things like the women's club or, some of the different groups on Meetup. And
Mhm.
when I first moved here, I looked and I couldn't find them, but then, you find those people that share those commonalities, and they're like, hey,
Mhm.
have you heard about this? Have you heard about that? And it's like, no. So then immediately, like, you get immersed and plugged in, and,
Yeah.
those few people that you do connect with, they kind of shape the direction that you're going. It's kind of
Mhm.
like you're kind of wandering around, and then you meet
Mhm.
somebody, and then it's like immediately like you're plugged in and you have that sense of connectedness and community.
Oh yeah, for sure. I think that you know, it's not about being popular. Hopefully a lot of us have kind of shed that um ideal off of ourselves from what we wanted maybe when we were in elementary or middle school or high school, is to like have that crowd of people.
Hmm.
And I've just learned over time that if you can just really find one or two quality people to, you invest in and they invest in you, and you cheer each other on, and you have some of those common interests, that those are the real diamonds. It's not necessarily like, oh, I have like 10 friends that I get together with all the time. And,
Yeah.
that's hard because even, we talk about Key West maybe being so different from how some people were raised or how they choose to live their life. But also in the military, I mean, where else do you have such a giant melting pot of different backgrounds and different beliefs, and just the different experiences that people had based on where they were born and grew up, and different things like that. We're all so different, that I think, if you have like a constant group of 10 friends, that's something pretty amazing.
Yeah.
Because at some point or another, there's going to be people in your circle that you may disagree with, or you guys may have, a little disagreement about something and can't talk for a while or whatever. And, that happens sometimes. And I've seen so many other spouses who decide just to kind of like, oh, well, I'm just not going to get close to anybody ever again. Like, I'm just going to keep to my little family circle. And I just feel like that can be so dangerous sometimes, because time and again, I have found where I just feel like certain people were placed in my life for certain reasons at certain times. And hopefully some people feel like I've been that to them as well. Um, I definitely don't always want to be on the receiving end of other people. I want to say that I've given as well. But to find just that connection with other people where it's like, that's my person, that if my husband's gone and everything is just like hitting the fan and you're losing your mind, that you have those people that you can go to and they're there for you. Like, that is so invaluable in our military lifestyle, I feel like.
Yeah, especially with the transitions and the amount of transitions that we go through. It can be hard because, once you have like your little group, and then, with Uncle Sam at any point in
Oh
time,
yeah.
you can just up and move. And I've seen some people move more quickly than others. Um, but it's hard because you get in this groove, you've got your people, and then when that transition happens, it I don't want to say it breaks the circle, but it kind of does. And it
Yeah.
forces us to be resilient and to lean on each other and support each other. And I was really surprised and thankful at how strong our military community is down here, because there's so many, and
Hmm.
there's so many people, and not everyone lives on base. Lots of people live off base, and it's just nice to know that when you go out in town, there's people from all over the US,
Hmm.
all over the world, and in some way, shape, or form, we're connected. And you talked about people coming into your life at certain points in time for certain reasons. And, the other piece about some people, if they don't disagree with someone else, they just kind of cut them off or shut down and kind of
Hmm.
isolate themselves. And it's like, I like to think of, why is that person in my life? I know that
Right.
some people may be in my life forever. Some people only may be there for a short time, but what lesson was it that I was supposed to learn? And it's usually not until after the fact that we realize what the lesson was.
Oh
And then
yeah,
we are
for sure.
grateful, rather than like internalizing or externalizing like those, feelings of frustration and anger. But
Hmm.
definitely just, I feel that in itself is empowering and reminds us how much more connected to people we are. And I think, um, was it like 6 or 7 degrees of separation is actually much shorter
Hmm.
now. Like there was someone that I knew, from my home state of Kansas, and I had met a friend in Jacksonville, and they knew each other. And
Yeah.
I mean, what
Yeah.
are the odds that someone else from Jacksonville knew the same person that I knew in Kansas?
Oh
So
yeah,
those
for
degrees of
sure.
separation are, you know, just thinking about how much more connected we are to people than we realize. I think that's important too.
Yeah, for sure. I think that you know, the way that we impact the community around us is important. The way that we allow ourselves to find community is important. And I think just knowing that we can empower ourselves and also empower the other people around us. I try really hard to make sure that I'm being a positive impact on the people around me. And there have been times where, you know, I may give a lot to one person without getting much back from them. But there's been times that another person has given a lot to me and I feel like I'm not giving much back to them. So, I think that kind of that mentality of like, if somebody or something's not serving you, then you need to like kick it to the curb. And I think it's important to protect ourselves and build guards around our hearts and our homes. But I also think that, everything comes full circle. So sometimes when I feel like, man, I'm like giving and giving and giving of my time and my energy to this other person, but it's almost like I get like a little reminder that like a little like light goes off in my head that's like, yeah, but remember that time that you were going through this and you had this one person that was like always there for you
Mm-hmm.
and always, giving up their time and energy to be a support to you. And so I'm like, okay, like I can do this. And I think that's important because you're not always going to get kind of that tit for tat from one single relationship. But if we look at it as the big whole, the big whole picture of everything, like you said, like it, it just all comes full circle and we're all connected to each other. And so in the end, like what you give of yourself is going to come back to you, and likewise like what you feel like maybe you're taking more out of a friendship than you're giving, like
Mm-hmm.
eventually you're going to be able to give more, even if it's not to that same person. But
Absolutely.
I feel like that kind of empowers me to like be more active and proactive in my community around me, whether that whether we're talking about the community of Key West or just like my military spouse community or, my little community that we, you kind of go like the ripple circles. Like you have your little community of like your core friends. And then you kind of have like, like through my work at the preschool, like there's kind of like the other parents, because my kid also goes there. So, there's the other teachers and the other parents. And then it just kind of ripples out from there. And like you said, we're all connected in one way or another. And with social media and the ease of travel these days, it is like we're less of a degree of separation. I
Mm-hmm.
feel like too. Yeah. And I think about the times, we were in Target one time. My mom saw somebody that we knew from California, and it was like, what are you doing in West Texas? Like what on earth are you over here for? Or just the fact that like my husband and I both didn't grow up in our hometown, but eventually learned that my grandparents lived next door to his great aunt and uncle. And like, we had paintings from his great aunt. And, it's just amazing to find the different connections that we have to different people throughout life. And the effect that you have on the people around you has that ripple effect that just carries on and on and on.
Absolutely. You had mentioned something else that stuck out to me when you were talking about sometimes you feel like you're giving and giving and giving to people and not necessarily getting something back in return. And I think it's important to talk about that because I feel like that's one of the reasons why friendships dissipate or they, kind of
Hmm.
stop existing is because people are, always expecting something in return. And sometimes what we get in return is not something that's tangible. It's something that
Right.
is internal. So it could be, self growth of
Hmm.
yourself physically, mentally, spiritually, your character development, like you are being compassionate and empathetic. And, again, it kind of goes back to we don't always realize it in the moment. And
Right.
it's so nice to hear that you've got those different connections, whether it's here in QS, where you work, or with the other military spouses. And, no matter where you move, you always know someone in a certain place. And that is like your go-to person, like you
Yeah.
mentioned. So if you go to those locations, that's my girl, that's my guy, they're going to get me linked in
Yep.
with other people. And it just reinforces that connectedness.
Yeah, it's really an amazing thing to see. And I can travel all the way from Key West all the way to West Texas and have to pay for maybe one hotel stay. And it kind of just depends on how I break the trip up. But the rest of the way, I have friends, family, whatever, that I'm able to reach out to and be like, hey, I'm coming through town. You got an extra bed or a couch, or I'll bring my air mattress with me if you have a room. And it's just amazing, like you said, that we build those connections that carry on for a really long time. And, I do want to be careful to say that, there are times that we give more of ourselves, but at the same time, you want to make sure you're not being like just used and abused.
Oh yeah,
And you
definitely.
definitely don't want to become codependent or allow another person to become unhealthily codependent upon you for every single thing. But
Right.
it's kind of that finding the balance between the two. Like sometimes you do have to be really cautious and limit the amount that you give to somebody to protect yourself and your home. Like I said, putting up those guards. But at the same time, it's easy for a lot of people to swing way to the other extreme and say, well, I'm just not going to give anything of myself to anybody. And because we're all so connected and we all need that community, it's just so important that we keep a bit of our hearts open.
Hmm.
And I think especially with the military spouse community, it's easy to be like, oh, I only have a year left. Like it's not worth it to make any more friends. But I've had one of my best friends, we literally met like within the last year and a half of my time in Mississippi. And we spent 4.5 years there. So, that was a small chunk of time out of the time that we were in that place. And it's easy to become like jaded, I think, and just be like, well, it's not worth it to build these relationships because we're just going to move. But
Right.
we're closing ourselves off to some relationships that have the potential to be so beautiful. And like the friend that I mentioned, she's literally like a sister to me, and she's in Japan now and I'm here in Key West, and I'm still a
Wow.
little salty that she and her husband didn't put Key West on their orders. But I'm sacrificing of my own desires because they really wanted to go overseas, and I've seen their family just like have a blast in Japan, and so obviously I'm super happy for them. But my husband was talking about it because he just started a part-time job down here, and how when he meets people there that work there, they're like, oh man, like it's so good to meet you, like what's up, and they're so like enthusiastic. And he's like, in the military community, like the active duty people, a lot of time it's like, oh hey, nice to meet you. Like
Mhm.
there's just not that like enthusiasm. And it's not that people are trying to be mean or anything, but he even mentioned it. He's like, I just think that we do get jaded, or you can get jaded if you allow yourself to, like, oh, what's the point in investing much into this when we're not going to be here in 3 years or two
Right.
years But like I said, I think you have such a potential to miss out on some really amazing relationships if you go 10, 15, 20 years with that mindset stuck in place. So,
Definitely. And how has your baking business allowed you to, see that impact on the community? Because I'm sure some of your clients have been outside of the military community.
yes. So, it's really cool how everything just plays out, because I actually got to make a cookie order for a military reenlistment, but they hosted it at a venue out in town. And so when that venue saw the cookies, they were like, oh, who made these? And so now I have that connection, because she was so gracious to promote me to the venue that they used me for an event, and they have so many events there. And so while I haven't branched out a whole ton out into the Key West community, I can see that starting to happen. And
Wow.
yeah, and then somebody that I met through church is an event planner, and so he's using me for a cake right before spring break. And so it's just kind of cool to see how you can be empowered in your personal life and your business life and all those different areas just through those different connections that you make. And it's not like I'm like introducing people randomly as myself, like, hi, I'm Kirstin and I make cookies if you ever need anything. Like that'd be kind of funny but a little awkward. But just that people learn over time what your passions are. And I love supporting other people. Like obviously I can't photograph my family. Like I might, maybe my kids, like for Mardi Gras or whatever. But supporting them in their business, and then maybe they're like, oh, what do you do? And so then they're supporting you in your business, and it's really cool to see how the community comes together in that way.
Absolutely. It just reinforces that connectedness. Everybody is
Yes.
linked in some way, shape, or form. And how awesome is that, you had that networking opportunity at that venue,
Oh
because
yeah.
now you get to meet other people and word of mouth. I mean, that's one of the biggest ways that businesses, organizations, and people are promoted. And whether it's posted on social media or it's told to friends, it's still word of mouth. It's still someone
Yes.
telling something. And a lot of businesses don't realize the power that can have, both positively and negatively.
Right.
Um, I have a friend in particular that was talking about a situation at a restaurant, and it was a negative experience for them, and they had posted it on social media, and she's a lifestyle blogger, and she's got,
Oh
you
wow.
know,
Yeah.
quite a few thousand followers. And needless to say, this organization lost some business because people were like, well, I'm not
Right.
going to go there, I have kids and I don't want to be treated like that. So definitely, I think it's important to keep in mind how word of mouth can shape that connectedness, whether it's a positive experience or a negative experience. But that's super awesome that you had that positive experience. And I can only imagine
Yes.
that that's going to continue to grow, especially through work and other people in the community that see your work online or hear about you. And they're like, I want
Yeah.
me a cake, I want some cookies.
Yes. Yeah, it's for sure. Like I would say most of my business comes from people sharing what they've ordered from me and how much they love it. And so obviously it's like a lot of pressure because like you said, if I send out something bad and that's what people hear about, like that could definitely negatively impact me. And so I'm always like, oh, it's gonna be perfect, which we should always strive for when we're sending something out to other people, of course. But I love seeing just the different ways that um, both my business gets around through the community and just people learning about it and people in like Arizona ordering cookies from me because a friend shared it. It's kind of like crazy to see it go like US wide and like
Wow.
I can ship cookies, just not cakes, unfortunately.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, it's really cool to see that. And you're right, word of mouth is so important. And same thing with like just on a personal level, like the way that you treat other people, like that's gonna get around. And
Mhm.
if you act a certain way because of who your husband is or something like that, like that could get you either a good word of mouth or a bad word of mouth around town. And how you treat your neighbors, that's incredibly important. And it's been a while since I've lived in a military community, and there's been some ups and downs with living on base again, but mostly ups, I'm glad to report. But there's always just those experiences and you're kind of like, oh, like why do we have to have this like negative stigma about military spouses? But where else do people have like their careers and their life and where they live? Like how many other places do people like literally live like all around the people that they all work with? Like that's pretty unique to the military, I would say, other than maybe like super tiny towns. But it's like because we're doing all of this life together, we have all the added stresses that come with the military lifestyle. And so sometimes it's like, okay, we just got to find some grace for each other because
Yeah.
this life is hard and living with the people that you work with is hard. And it's just, I'm sure other like HOAs and stuff have their dramas too. But if we all find that like little bit of grace and compassion within our community, I think it goes a long way for sure.
Absolutely. And I think that's such a great point to, end with, just to leave
Hmm.
people with, that is something that can guide you if you not only instill it in yourself, but project that out into your actions and how you treat yourself and other people, because that
Yes.
can just flourish anything and everything that you come into contact with.
Oh, yes, for sure.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Kirsten, for joining us today. And for those of you listening, I will be more than happy to put Kirsten's contact info if you're interested in cookies, since she
Awesome. Yes.
ships nationwide. They're really good. They're really awesome. She's got
Oh,
some
thank you.
amazing talent. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me today.
Absolutely.
All right.